Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talk Nerdy. Today is Monday, January 9th, 2023. What? And I'm the host of the show, Cara Santa Maria. We are back from a 2-week hiatus. I always take off 2 weeks over the break so that I can, not completely implode. And it was, as much as it was restful, I was also sick for part of it. So I guess I needed it. My body was telling me that I needed it, but it could have been more restful. I hope that you guys had a good holiday. I know it's been a tough few years. We're going to open up with a story today that is, I think equal parts devastating, but also incredibly inspiring. But before we dive into this week's episode, I do want to thank those of you who continue to make Talk Nerdy possible. Now, we've been on the air now since 2014. My very first episode number 1, aired on March 2nd, 2014. And today's episode is episode number 437. There is no way in hell I would have been able to continue doing this for so long if it weren't for you guys and for your support. So let me kind of give a big shout out right now to those of you who have logged on to patreon.com/talknerdy, have decided to, on a weekly basis, or I should say on an episodic basis, continue to support the show, anywhere from, 50 cents to $50. This week's top patrons include Daniel Lang, David J.E. Smith, Mary Neva, Brian Holden, David Compton, Gabrielle F. Jaramillo Gonzalez, Joe Wilkinson, Leonard Prince, Pasquale Gelati, Ulrika Hagman, and so many more of you. There are literally tons of you, and I couldn't be more grateful. There's always more to say. I wish I had more time to say it, but I don't want to talk too much here at the top of the show because I do think it's a really, really important one. So I have the incredible opportunity to have another conversation with Beth Pratt. Now, you guys may remember Beth Pratt because she was on the show, I think, in 2016. I'm actually looking right now. On August 22nd, 2016, she was in episode 123, and the episode was called Mountain Lion P-22 with Beth Pratt Bergstrom. We talked all about our resident celebrity mountain lion. His name is P-22, and kind of what he means to Angelenos, and, kind of how in some ways he was a success story, and in some ways he really wasn't a success story. So we got a little deep about P-22 and what he means to us. But things have changed a bit since then. So Beth, I want to introduce her to you first. She is a wildlife advocate. She is an author. What is there to say? I mean, she's a dear friend of mine. There's so many things I could say about Beth. I guess I should tell you, her official title is that she is the California Regional Executive Director for the National Wildlife Federation. She's worked in environmental leadership for most of her career and in 2 of the U.S.'s largest national parks, Yosemite and Yellowstone. She also leads the Save LA Cougars campaign, and she is responsible, really, for doing all of the incredible fundraising and just really hard work to build the largest wildlife crossing here in North America. She also wrote a book called I Heart Wildlife, a guided activity journal for connecting with the wild world. And she wrote When Mountain Lions Are Neighbors. She's endlessly Googleable as well, and she has a giant tattoo of P-22 on her shoulder. Beth, I mean, we'll get into it, but Beth is responsible for P-22's popularity, for his persona. She worked tirelessly, kind of running his Facebook page and just really kind of increasing his visibility during his long and beautiful life. And if you don't know much about P-22 because you didn't listen to the last episode or he just wasn't on your radar, P-22 he was a wild mountain lion that resided in Griffith Park, a very small park in the middle of urban Los Angeles. He was first identified in 2012 on a camera trap there. He was not born in Griffith Park. He was born in the Santa Monica Mountains and made his way across perilous traffic to find his way into Griffith Park as a young adult. And, lots of people caught him on their Ring cameras. He was caught on camera traps. He became an icon. And really, his story will always be, I think, a very important story for us to understand more about urban wildlife and connectivity. And we're going to get really deep into what that means during the show. Unfortunately, P-22 died on December 17th, 2022. So this is very, very fresh in our minds. He lived in Griffith Park for 10 years. He was quite old for a wild male mountain lion. He had suffered multiple traumatic injuries and a lot of longer-term health issues, and we'll get into that conversation as well. And the decision was made to euthanize him. It was heartbreaking. A lot of us Angelinos are really in mourning over the loss of this beautiful cat, but I think that his legacy will really live on, and that's why I've chosen to title this episode Legacy of P-22 with Beth Pratt. So without any further ado, here she is, really the woman behind P-22, Beth Pratt. Well, Beth, oh my gosh, I have to say I'm really excited to be talking to you. It's regretful that it's after or kind of around such difficult circumstances, but I'm glad that you are open and willing to use this opportunity today to chat with us and to teach us a few things.
Oh yeah, no, thanks, Kara. We've been friends for a long time, and you've been someone who's helped us protect P-22 since the beginning. So I think it's good to grieve with friends, and I think we've all had to grieve a pet or even a family member, which I feel like P-22 is part of our family. It's been a little both hard to have to both grieve him, but also be his public spokesperson. But that's also helped me grieve, and it's kept me busy and watching how the world. This cat was trending on Twitter the day he, died. He was in Rolling Stone magazine. That to me has really helped because he just had an impact on so many across the world.
Yeah. And I don't even really know if I want to be linear with this, like chronological, if I want to just kind of go where my heart takes me. But
yeah, I think it's a heart podcast.
Right? Yeah, it has to be. The thing that comes up for me is just this idea that like, it's not a local story anymore. Like you mentioned, it was in Rolling Stone magazine. Like I did coverage on P-22 back when I was working for PBS, like the local PBS outlet.
Yep. Didn't you win an award for that series?
I did. Yeah. And we read about, in the LA Times, and obviously those of us whose hearts and souls are in Southern California, it's like P-22, we know him. He's part of our family, like you mentioned. But I was getting messages from all over the world when people were finding out and being like, how are you doing? Tell me what's going on, because P-22 transcended our local community.
Yeah, he wasn't just an LA story or a California story. I think he was that, I think all of us, wherever we live, or I should say most of us, want a connection to wildlife. And it may be that connection may take different forms. You might write music about it. You may be someone who likes to see wildlife when you're hiking or scuba diving. You may be someone who has a backyard, bird feeder, whatever. But most people, I think that connection to wildness is something, even if we don't sometimes realize it, that we crave. And I think that this amazing creature who literally was a holdover, his kind from the last ice age, was hanging on, under the symbol of our age, the Hollywood sign, in the most improbable of places. I just think captured our imaginations on wherever we lived, whether it be in LA or, across the globe. But I also think it also reminded us that wildness wasn't lost, even in a city as crowded as Los Angeles. And I think that, to me, is what tugged at the heartstrings, that this remarkable cat was showing us what was possible.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, there has to be, this is such a difficult situation because there's a part of you, not even a part of you, most of you, a huge part of you that always knew this day was coming.
Yeah.
But to be prepared for it. So I'm curious from you, and I don't know if this is even comfortable for you to do, but like in your mind, having worked as P-22 spokesperson for so long, having gotten very close to P-22, the animal, not just kind of the personality, what we know about P-22 from a scientific perspective, but also how P-22 as an icon helped drive awareness and movement towards more connectivity in Los Angeles, but also knowing that his story was not necessarily a success. I mean, like it was a success story that was also not a success story. How in your mind did you think this day was going to come? You know, you must have had a part of you that was mentally preparing for it even years ago.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think first of all, what I had been thinking of lately after he passed is P-22 was the longest serious relationship of my life, and you know,
Wow.
and in
Wow.
some respects, I think it's probably no coincidence we only saw each other once in that whole time. So,
Right.
I think that's the key to success there. But I think, yeah, I mean, listen, as somebody who, like, I'm looking at my 5 dogs and 2 cats, I've had animals my whole life. And, you can prepare yourself and know that this day is coming. And I've had to prepare myself for way too many days in my 50 years of having pets. But it doesn't make it any easier when it does come. And I think, P-22's behavior changed almost radically overnight. So although we have been preparing ourselves for this day for a long time, um, knowing he wasn't going to live forever, I don't think any of us saw that it would play out like it did, which is literally went from, showing some signs of age to within just a few weeks span, almost changing on a dime, showing that something significantly was wrong with him, which we now know he was not just old age. He had kidney failure. He had heart disease. I mean, I could go down the whole list. And then probably because of that, in his weakened condition, he who had evaded cars for so long, unlike his relatives, did get hit, and that caused some really serious internal damages too. So it was just in some respects so sudden. I guess I don't think I saw it playing out so sudden. What I had actually worried about for the last few years and had talked with the National Park Service about was him starving to death. That's what mountain lions do, right? I mean, that's how they die usually, except, this population, a lot of them get hit by cars or die from rodenticides. But, P-22 is getting up to the age where a natural mountain lion death is you just can't hunt anymore. And that can go pretty quickly. They miss, they need about a deer a week, and they miss one deer, and, you can starve to death in a couple, 3 weeks. And so we had talks about, I remember telling the Park Service, like, nobody's going to stand for him starving to death on camera. This is P-22. Like, you're going to have to think about that. Like, I don't know what the answer is, but do you feed him? Do you, so I think that was one thing we had talked about. But I think sort of that these chronic illnesses would cause a pretty big change in his behavior. In retrospect, might have been something we should have thought about, but I don't think anybody was really, thinking that way. He was just being P-22 right up until the very end.
That makes sense. I think it's probably important. Obviously, I'm time traveling here a little bit, but at the beginning, I have done a quick intro to the episode that everybody heard, and hopefully, those of you who have been with us for quite some time already listened to the interview that you and I, Beth, you and I did quite a while ago, talking about P-22. But maybe the quick and dirty of it all, because I don't want to spend too much time on it. And I know it's probably not a happy thing for you. It's like the eulogy part of it, where can you give us a little bit of a background of like, who was this cat? Where did he come from? When did we discover him? Where did he live? All that good stuff.
Yeah, I'm staring as I talk to you at this beautiful photo of him drinking water that this photographer Roy Dunn took, and he's just such a beautiful cat. He really was handsome for the Brad Pitt of his kind, as we call him. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, he is the story to me. He is the poster cat, or the story of the plight of all these mountain lions in the Santa Monica Mountains. Which he was a young mountain lion growing up in the central Santa Monica Mountains, not far from where Kim Kardashian lives, and growing up with a lot of open space there, yet just not connected open space. So mountain lions are solitary creatures. When they come of age, about 1 or 2 years old, they have to disperse and find a new home. Well, when you're living in the middle of one of the most densely populated areas in the country, that ain't easy. These home ranges are enormous, like 150 square miles. So P-22 in some respects was just being a mountain lion. Okay, I got to go find a new home or I'm going to get killed by the dominant male here. But what he did, which is just, again, no scientist on earth, we all joke, never would have predicted this. He marched across two of the busiest freeways in the country, the 405 and the 101, and then makes a home in Griffith Park, which is not in the middle of, not on the outskirts of LA, but right in the middle of LA. The Hollywood sign is there, the observatory is there. And he stayed. He stayed for 10 years, which, perhaps not surprisingly, he probably made that journey, which most of his mountain lion relatives die trying, getting hit by cars. He successfully made it, and I'm sure made a big risk assessment in his mind, like, I ain't doing that again. I won't make it. And you know what? Plenty of deer here, and bachelorhood isn't so bad. So he remained, in essence, trapped on this urban island for 10 years, cut off from the rest of his kind, and never going to have a girlfriend. We joke that most people in LA can relate to their love lives or their dating lives being impacted by the 405 divide, and
For
P-22 was
sure.
no exception, right?
Yeah.
So I think what was really successful about him is he made it, right? And he was able to be a wild mountain lion for the most part in Griffith Park, and there was plenty of deer, and he pretty much stayed within the wild areas of Griffith Park. He would come into the neighborhoods just occasionally until the very end here. But he wasn't a success story in that it's not that he shouldn't have been in Griffith Park, but his territory was 8 square miles, which again is the smallest known home range ever recorded for a male mountain lion. He should have been able to get in and out of Griffith Park. And I think that's the story there. And he became the symbol for this population that were literally, all his kin are inbreeding themselves out of existence because they can't get to new territories because of these freeways. And he was the most extreme example of that, in that not only he wasn't inbreeding with family members, he couldn't even breed because no females could get to him, or he couldn't get to any females. So yeah, the trapped, lonely bachelor who we call the Brad Pitt of the cougar world, that was our beloved P-22. And boy, it's really hard to talk about him in the past tense after 10 years,
Yeah. So when we think about the other animal, because there are many P's, right? P stands for puma, and they're numbered in the order that they are, I guess, identified. And is it when they're collared that they're numbered, or just when they're seen?
When they're collared or tagged. So they're up to about 103, 104 now. P-22 was the 22nd cat tagged in the study. So they will, as soon as they capture the kittens, they won't put a collar on it first because they'll just put some tagging on them. So some of the kittens are tagged before they're collared. But once they are tagged and captured, they become a part of the study.
Okay. And so most of these cats, I mean, you said they're like well over 100, are they just hanging in the mountains, or are they dispersing like north? I mean, P-22 was weird because he just went straight kind of like east. He was like, hello, I'm getting out of here and I'm going across town. But where do most of these animals disperse to, if they're lucky enough to disperse, if they don't get hit by a car in the process?
Yeah. So there's about, so they have, I think, 103, 104 to date that they've captured, but a lot of those have passed on. There's about 10, maybe to 15 in the sort of greater Los Angeles area. If you think sort of from Ventura up to the Simi Hills, pretty much P-22 in the Verdugos is the eastern boundary. I mean, after that, it's just almost impossible. to get across, or at least that's kind of the loose study area. There's about 10 to 15 cats at any one time. There's some we don't have collared or even know about, but at least they probably at any one time have about 10 cats collared. They try anything. I mean, the ones we've lost that we know of, and this was a terrible year. I think we're up to 7 or 8. I've lost count of cats that have just been hit by cars this year, which is a new record in the study area. It's devastating when we lose them. And I'd say they try everything. We had, lost some cats on the 405, where P-22 was literally one of the few to successfully cross. We've lost them on the 5. We've lost them on the 118, on the 126. We had a cat killed close to the wildlife crossing site this fall.
I mean,
And
in a way, it's like, yeah, that makes sense because that's where they would want to cross. But
yeah,
no.
indeed, they had a GPS point. He was right at the crossing site, and then went about a mile towards east to cross and got hit. But if the crossing had been there, it made me feel terrible. I mean, he would have been okay. And we had another cat killed the day before groundbreaking this April. So they just try everywhere. And so when the males get killed, and then, the dominant males are sort of stuck in these very fragmented territories inbreeding with their relatives. And that's what happens.
And so basically the males try to disperse as far as they can. If they don't die, they sort of pick a spot that feels like it's enough roaming territory for them to not bump up against other males. Like that's really what it is.
They'll try to find their own territory. The younger males almost invariably just get out of town once they disperse. They know they're not, that's what P-22 was. At 1 to 2, they're in no shape to challenge a male, an older male. So, and then again, most of the male mountain lions in the Santa Monica Mountains don't live past age 2 because they usually get hit by a car or, get killed by the dominant male there because they can't get away. In a mountain lion situation, like up where I live, I don't live in LA full time, although it's kind of a second home, but I live up near Yosemite. We got lots of open space here. There's roads, but a lot of the encounters won't end deadly, right? The mountain lions will try to get away as sort of a first resort. But there they can't, right? I mean, that's the problem is the younger males have nowhere to go. And they either get hit by cars or likely get taken out by the older male there. Usually what would happen is, a younger male would go somewhere, maybe open territory or kind of stay out of sight and sort of like Rocky, Jeff Sickett used to say, kind of toughen up over a couple years and then they're ready to kind of challenge. But, they don't have that luxury in the Santa Monica Mountains. They can't go anywhere to sort of take a time out.
Right. And so you mentioned the crossing. In the last episode, we talked about the crossing because it was a goal when we met last time. But tell us a little more about what is a wildlife crossing? What have you accomplished? I mean, it's incredible to be able to make this honestly kind of a dream, a reality.
I kind of have been, P-22 hung on just long enough to get that crossing built. Is me, who is a hard scientist, but keeps kind of running through my head. He ensured a legacy for his kind. And so I like to kind of, when I think about the crossing now, think about that. But yeah, these wildlife crossings are nothing new. They have been around for decades. They work. You're talking 80-90% success rates. And I mean, what I love is they're an environmental solution that is easy. You put the wildlife crossing up, the wildlife cross it, bam, we've solved the problem, right? So they're wonderful in that, these are not hard problems to solve. It really does just take money and time to build them. But what's unique about ours, which again, when we first did the first podcast and met as friends, that was almost a decade ago when it did seem like an impossible dream to try to build a wildlife crossing in the middle of the Los Angeles area. Everybody's like, why would you put one there? You're crazy. You'll never raise the money. It's stupid. I mean, just all the things you hear when you're trying to tackle something visionary. And it was a long journey, I'll tell you, not without some really challenging times, but we did it. And here we are now, 10 years later, at least for that I've been working on the project, other partners for decades, not just a decade. And we broke ground on Earth Day. It was, we don't get a lot of wins in the environmental and wildlife area. That was really, truly a remarkable day. To get up there and stand up there with Governor Newsom and Wallace Annenberg and say we did it, and know that once finished, we would help prevent not just the extinction of this species, a local mountain lion population, but also prevent more suffering. I mean, we don't talk about enough, I think, the suffering that is caused on a wide scale by roads. And I think,
for sure. I don't think we talk about the suffering amongst these any ecologic, when we think about it's devastating. When we think about the damage that we as human beings have done from an infrastructure perspective, from a deforestation perspective, from a industrialization perspective, we talk about it in numbers. Like, it's always like in terms of mortality. It's never in terms of like actual like existential suffering for these creatures. Or okay, maybe if you're somebody who doesn't think that they can be existentially suffering, like physical pain and harm. Like, they're anxious all the time, and they're dying painful deaths.
It's, I think there's a moral cost to driving that me, who loves my car, for both people and wildlife, that we have not reckoned with. When you look at the numbers, again, for either people or wildlife, I mean, wildlife, it's like 1 million plus big animals a year. I mean, think about that for a minute, right? That we're okay with to transport. And then I forget what the people stats are. I do know in California alone, we lose 4,000 people a year to our roads. If that was a disease, it would be a public health crisis, right? So there's this moral.
I read once that the deadliest animal to human beings, like here in America, and people are like, "Oh, is it the mosquito?
Yeah.
Is it the snake?" It's deer, because people hit them and
it is
cars,
because of,
and then they die
because of road collisions. They estimate it's like $9 billion a year in property damage and injuries that collisions with animals cost us. If you're not someone who likes animals, but at least want to look at what the cost is to humans. But I had been working. I've been working on this crossing for a decade, and it wasn't till a couple summers ago I had really thought about the suffering. I had been there and seen dead mountain lions, and obviously we all see roadkill, and it's horrible, right? It's just horrible to see roadkill. But you like you're saying, I sort of was still thinking about it in very scientific terms. But it was a couple summers ago, a neighbor called, somebody had hit a bobcat up near me. I live on the entrance to Yosemite National Park, so there's a fair amount of tourist traffic and on this 140. And so I went thinking I would probably, it would be dead. But I got there, and it's on the side of this road. It's 100 degrees out. Cars are whizzing by. I'm sitting there crying. And this animal is just suffering greatly. But, I will say there's a happy ending to this one. But as I'm sitting there, the cars weren't even slowing for a blonde girl sitting 5 feet from the side of the road, crying. What chance does any animal have? And I scooped up the cat. He didn't die right away. Got him in my car, and we were able to get him down to a rescue facility a couple hours south of me. They had to take his leg off, but he is okay. His name is Billy the Bobcat, and he is doing great.
And he most certainly would have died if he had just
he would have
stayed there.
died.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at the photos of this cat I took when he was on the side of the road. He looked dead. But it really hit me, it took it out of this abstraction for me, sitting there watching an animal suffer like that, how much suffering happens every day like that, the animal doesn't make it. So I think that there is again, these crossings to me have come to also symbolize a way we can alleviate suffering, not just that, yes, we need for biodiversity and climate and whole ecosystems to have crossings because nature needs connection. But we also need to do this because it's morally the right thing. I mean, this is a terrible death, and we should be alleviating suffering.
And so just for those who like maybe have never seen a wildlife crossing, like I know I probably have a lot of European listeners who are like, oh yeah, like we have one of those. I've been there. But like it's not, I mean, I know it exists in North America, but it's not is it common in the US?
Definitely Europe was some of the most widespread crossings where they caught
Mhm.
on decades ago. So yeah, a lot of European people are way more accustomed to them. I'd say over here, a lot of people have seen them in Banff. The
Okay.
first wildlife crossing in the U.S., oddly enough, is Florida. So
Oh, cool.
it was a undercrossing for bears that I think was put in a few decades ago. They're here, but we're catching up. I mean, we certainly are
Okay.
way
Okay.
behind the rest of the world, but you can see them in Montana, Wyoming, Utah, Nevada, and many other places. Arizona, Florida, of course, did some of the most extensive early crossings for the undercrossings for the Florida panther. So I'd see where they were more common early in the U.S. was where you had these vast ungulate migrations, deer and elk, and they were mainly more for the human safety. And as someone who worked in Yellowstone for years, I can tell you that is a problem. You
Right.
were
So
taking your life
you
in
don't
your
get hit
hands.
by it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
But we're
But
catching up. Governor Newsom, who have the good fortune of working with, and Secretary Crowfoot, we have pledged to do more here in California. We were just at COP15 when all this P-22 stuff started happening, but we were there. We did a press event about California, learning from others, but also really leading the way and connecting, especially these urbanized landscapes, which
And
have
that's
not.
what's different, right?
Yeah.
Like that's really like the wildlife crossing at Liberty Canyon, this specific one that I mean, there's so many questions, but number one, and I don't know if you're able to say this on air, so it's okay if this is like a tacky question, but like how much money did you end up having to raise
Yeah,
for
no,
this
I'll
thing?
talk money. I'm transparent.
Okay. Yeah.
So we have raised, let's see, 104 million and counting. I know it's astounding.
Wow.
I remember when $100 donation a decade ago was like, woo! Here we go. We got this. Um, and you know what? A lot of people are like, oh my God, $100 million. That's so costly. It really isn't when you look at what we're doing. I mean, this thing is massive. This is 10 lanes of pavement the structure has to go over and an access road. It has to be vegetated with sound walls. And, you can't compare it to other wildlife crossings because they don't have the same, like you said, the urbanness is what makes this so different. That we have to mitigate and design for things that a crossing like in the middle of nowhere in Wyoming wouldn't have to, such as traffic. Oh my God, 300 to 400,000 cars a day will be using this crossing. And you have to really mitigate that noise or the wildlife won't use it. And just for comparison, some of the highest traffic crossing I can find in North America next to that is about 14,000 cars a day. So it's just, this is such a massive undertaking. But yeah, it was the crossing cost itself is about 90 million. And then we have other stuff we need for the campaign, like research and stuff. But yeah, I didn't know I had it in me, but apparently I did.
So cool. And you think 90 million, like you said, like that's so much money, but also it's like it's an infrastructure project.
It's an
Like if
infrastructure
we were to
project.
look
Yeah.
at how much roads and bridges and stuff cost, like it makes sense. But this is you mentioned like in Florida, like this underpass, and in all of these different parts of the country, you were using words like underpass. This is an overpass, right? Like this
Yeah.
is a massive, basically green belt thing that's built on concrete that goes over the freeway.
Yeah, I think this is one of the coolest things ever, not just because I'm working on it. And we were, it hasn't really been attempted again in an urban area like this. And I would say also the ecological stitch we're putting on this, or the top coat, for lack of a better word. I don't know what you want to call it. Our designer, Robert Rock, calls it a green roof on steroids. That's not been attempted before either. If you look at a lot of these crossings, what they usually do is it's a conveyance system, right? They want to get the big animals from A to B. And, and so they throw some gravel and that's fine. Every crossing's goal is different. The geography determines it, the species you want to save, all that stuff. But what we're doing, although the mountain lions are the most critically imperiled and need it, this is reconnecting the Santa Monica Mountains ecosystem for all wildlife. That's why you'll have a complete ecosystem on top. I mean, we have a plant nursery. They started collecting mushrooms 2 years ago. It's going to be this incredible living landscape on top of one of the busiest freeways in the country. And there's something so hopeful about, at rush hour, cars driving under it, while on top of it, a mountain lion could be walking over. I don't know. There's just something very hopeful about that prospect. And I think the world really sees this. We were just named, oh my God, I couldn't believe this. We forget sometimes how globally significant this project is when you're, sort of working on it day by day. We were named one of the 50 most influential projects in the world, number 15 in a list of, I think it was 50 or 100, up there with the Human Genome Project and the James Webb Telescope. And we're like, oh my God.
Oh my gosh,
but incredible. It is, nobody thinks of urban areas as worthy of wildlife conservation. And I think that this one shows absolutely we need to be rethinking our urban spaces. And that's what is revolutionary about this one, even if wildlife crossings are nothing new.
Right. I mean, there's so many things that you just mentioned that I want to highlight. Like number one, that we will not be able to continue on this planet if we don't start wildly rethinking the way that we live in urban environments. There's no reason. I have milkweed planted on my concrete balcony on the 4th floor of my apartment in Florida, and there are monarchs. You know what I mean? I literally have created multiple monarchs. And there's no reason that everybody couldn't do that everybody couldn't say, even though I live in a bit of a concrete jungle, I can bring the hummingbirds here. I can plant different things here. I can, even if it's in a pot, it's sort of how do I put this? Well, this is so cliche, but it's the field of dreams. And I'm sure you've said this before. If you build it, they will come. Yeah. That is what you're doing right now.
It's true. And I think, I come from, my background, Carrie, I come from a very traditional sort of environmental background. I worked in national parks most of my career, Yosemite, Yellowstone. And, if you had told me 10 years ago, I'd be working on wildlife conservation issues in Los Angeles, I would have laughed hysterically at you and been like, what? But this is what I love about science. It showed us how wrong we were. When I was coming up in conservation, God, 35 years. God, that's hard to. Yeah.
Math. It's fine.
A little time ago, the dominant view still was you put, the wildlife in places like national parks, like Yosemite or a wildlife refuge, and you put the people over here and never the two shall meet. And these habitat islands are enough. They're protected space. Well, we now know science has told us it's not true, that you need large connected landscapes for wildlife to have a future, and that, climate change doesn't know boundaries like Yosemite National Park, and these connected spaces are necessary for resilient ecosystems. But I think it's also coupled with the number one threat to wildlife worldwide is a loss of habitat. So if we don't start rethinking our human spaces as being part of the solution, we just don't have enough open space left to ensure, healthy ecosystems and enough habitat for what's left. Like P-22 is a good example. What were you going to do? I mean, he had no other choice. So it was either he doesn't exist or doesn't have a life, or he stays in Griffith Park. So I think that's sort of the choices a lot of this wildlife are facing, that, listen, they don't have the hangups. I don't think P-22 was sitting in Griffith Park thinking about he wanted to be in a Yosemite. He was just thinking about surviving. And I think we need to check our own hangups about wildlife being in, human spaces, which I think P-22 really helped. He helped change our preconceptions of where it was appropriate for wildlife to be.
You're so right. And I think it just goes back to this like very human psychology sort of like bias that's quite a fatal bias where we always think in such a binary way. Like either this is a wild space or it's not. Well, maybe my balcony is not a habitat where an animal would be able to live out its whole life, but maybe it could stop there for a drink. Maybe it could get a little bit of nourishment on its way to the next thing. And when we think about what you were talking about, the suffering, the moral imperative. I mean, in an ideal world, Griffith would not have been where P-22 ended up, but it might have been a place he could stop for a respite as he then continued on his way.
You nailed it. I mean, it's not that it shouldn't have been part of his territory, but to make him a whole mountain lion, he should have been able to move in and out of it. And I think, I said it as part of the eulogy I wrote for him. He never stopped being impacted by this lack of connectivity, right? He had a terrible journey that most of his kin don't make. He faced terrible choices. He made it. Again, what a remarkable cat in Griffith Park. But we always worried about him being hit by cars. He was not able to have the full territory that a male mountain lion would have. He had bad choices. And then, of course, as he got older, what we saw the last, I'd say, 6 weeks of his life is those bad choices narrowed to terrible choices and an outcome that was directly the result of the lack of connectivity. If he had been able to move in and out of Griffith Park, he probably actually wouldn't have lived this long. I think he would have, another male would have probably, disposed of him and sort of taken over, which is what happened. So, 12 is so extraordinarily old for a male mountain lion. He might not have been seeing some of these health issues. And I can't say this scientifically, but I think, venture a guess here, having closely followed the movement of this cat and having cats myself, which are little domestic cats or just small male mountain lions. I think he was trying to get somewhere like cats would at the end he knew his time was up. And I think that's part of the reason he might have been heading into different territory, heading down to Silver Lake. Part of it also was when he obviously just couldn't take down a deer there at the end. Not just pets, but raccoons and smaller animals tend to hang out in those urban backyards because of gardens and trash. But I also think, he might have been trying to get just somewhere else, and he was out of options. Poor guy,
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm curious. I know it's a tough thing to talk about, but, we talk about sort of normal, healthy, developmentally appropriate mountain lion behavior and what a normal, healthy lifespan of a mountain lion is, given that, there are always parameters. Like, it's probably hard to even know, like in the quote wild, like what does that even mean anymore? Right. So like all of them are facing these like intense pressures, but what did really change? Like what were some of the things about his behavior towards the end where you and where, the scientists who have been monitoring him for so long were like, like we might need to actually dart him and take him in and look at him.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think, the thing that we all, those of us who work on his protection, like the Park Service and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, always say this is such an unprecedented situation. You just don't, we've never had a male mountain lion in such a small space age on camera, right? He was the Truman Show cat. And so, but we've never, there was no playbook here, right? Because it had never happened before. But I think the care and compassion which these agencies showed, and I'll tell you, they were, working with them every step of the way. I can't applaud them enough. And, for those of you who saw the video, we can talk about too, the agency, like Chuck, who was the head of CDFW, Chuck Bonham. He's an amazing man. All of these agency folks crying over this decision, I think is so unprecedented too, in a good way, that, compassion does need to be factored more into wildlife management. And I think that California does that really well. But to your original question, all these agencies love P-22 just as much as anybody. And he is the most watched cat, I think, in the world, mountain lion, I should say. I'd say it was the spring. They at least started noticing what they thought might have been a mild case of mange, but weren't sure. It didn't actually look like traditional mange, which we now know why. But he just was looking a little like his face was looking older, but that wasn't, it was sort of like, let's just watch him. He was still at that point, though, taking down deer. They actually hike into almost every kill,
Oh, I
and can
didn't know
tell.
that.
Yeah. So they know if he's eating well. And,
Okay.
that is probably the surest sign of a healthy mountain lion if he's still able to take
Sure. I
down
mean,
deer.
as we
So,
know with our pets and with our loved ones, like their appetite changes are what tell us that something's wrong. I'm curious, you mentioned a couple of times that this is a cat that's like always watched, like the Truman
right.
Show. And for those who maybe don't understand how, it's not like we can just check in with him. He's collared. His collar doesn't allow us to see him. So is this just all camera trap footage? We just have a series of amazing camera traps all over the park?
Yeah. it's,
Okay. All right.
it's kind of funny. We have, his GPS collar only gives 1 point every hour at night when he's most active. And these are all the cats in the Santa Monica Mountains. And then 1 point during 8 hours in the day, just because you don't want to use up the batteries too fast. So they get at least, some general locations, but it really has been camera traps, but more so than camera traps, really, because you can't have, there's not a lot of those, is these Ring cameras. Everybody's got one now.
Oh,
And
how
so
funny.
those have really helped the researchers, not just with P-22, but him being the most extreme example of really tracking his movements and also being able to kind of monitor from video his health conditions. Although you can't, as you know, you can't diagnose health, but from a video, but you can at least see if he's starting to look bad. But yeah, so I'd say they were watching him pretty, they're just monitoring him pretty closely. And then the Chihuahua, I think that in itself was not enough for capture, but that certainly was, okay, this is different. He had preyed on dogs before, really, at least that they know of, only a couple times. And these were dogs, that were wandering in Griffith Park. So preying on a dog was not out of the question. Mountain lions do that. But,
Well, he had eaten a koala once, right?
yeah, exactly. He had dined on Killarney, the poor koala, and
in the zoo. Yeah. People are like, "What? No, okay." There's
I know.
there's a zoo in Griffith Park also.
It's insane to think. I mean, this is what I love about P-22 too. Just these insanely ridiculous situations, which are unprecedented on this planet, which is a koala and a mountain lion meeting. That's our P-22. Yeah, he jumped in the LA Zoo and, he just thought it was a strange looking raccoon. But yes,
right, and that's not like necessarily problematic per se.
No.
It's problematic in like they didn't put the koala away and like they were like, "Oops, well,
Right.
that's what happens." But it wasn't back when he ate the koala, which was like a few years ago now. It didn't make anybody go like, "Uh-oh, something's wrong." It was like, "Okay, there's a crime of opportunity."
Yes, exactly. A crime of opportunity. Okay. And indeed, I remember, that was a time we knew each other. And I mean, the world supported him. The zoo came out and apologized. I mean, it was, they were like, hey, this is P-22's home. And yeah, we needed to make our fence bigger. So, and you're right. There was nothing unusual about that. And in some respects, nothing unusual about P-22 going after a dog. These are cats. For those of us who have cats, know if something moves, they're on it. So he kills that Chihuahua, and okay, like we're now like, okay, we need to watch that. In some respects, not abnormal mountain behavior. It's dark. The dog was being walked behind. Did he know it was on a leash? Who knows? But it was enough
that does mean that he was approaching a person.
Yes.
Basically, he was close enough to a person.
Exactly. That was what was a little different. Although even in my mind, he's so around people a lot. Obviously in his environment and had never made an aggressive move. Was he even zeroed in on the person? Obviously not. He was zeroed in on the little dog, but still it was definitely different. So that's when we, I think the agency started, okay, we need to watch this. Because capturing P-22, especially, or any mountain lion, is always risky. Anesthesia, as we know, especially for a 12-year-old cat, you don't want to make that decision lightly. So And since it was just one Chihuahua, at that point, it was not a patent. But then bam, I mean, it was literally, he takes that first Chihuahua, and when he had taken the Chihuahua, he had killed a deer a couple weeks before that. So they're like, okay, he's still eating deer. Maybe this was just a case of wrong place at the wrong time, everybody. And, but then his behavior changed like radically at that point. He was, down in Silver Lake and not just roaming through people's backyards, but staying there. He had taken a raccoon out, which again was, he's eaten raccoons, mountain lions will, but, in somebody's backyard, and he was hanging there. He then, I think, had close encounters with 5 dogs within a 2-week period. I was driving around Silver Lake, trying to monitor. He was just hanging out so urban, for most of his
too
life.
Close to people.
Yeah, he was in Griffith Park hunting deer. He would stay in the most remote areas or the wild areas of Griffith Park. He'd come into the neighborhoods, but just to travel. What you saw
they didn't have actual sightings back in the day, right? Like they saw him on his ring cam once in a blue moon. I think there was like a thing where he was like sleeping under somebody's house.
Yeah,
but for the most part, like we didn't see this cat.
You didn't see him,
except,
no.
Like not in the flesh.
Not in the flesh, no. And then all of a sudden, literally in this like 6-week period, everybody's seeing him. He's wandering around. He's napping in full view. He's, and then once the second dog, bam, they're like, we got to capture him.
And that's scary. I mean, it's scary for people living in those neighborhoods. Like there's a large cat that's been attacking people's pets, which is also like, it's not his typical behavior.
It was, I think, we have to balance 2 things. One is the well-being of P-22 and the well-being of the community. Now, we do not relocate usually, or I should say California. I'm not in charge of it, but if a mountain lion takes out a dog or a cat, that is not cause for capture or any punitive measure. That is more you as the livestock or pet owner needs to, you are in mountain lion territory. You need to
exactly.
But
be careful.
Yeah, what definitely was different, why they led to capture, was not actually so much that he was going after dogs, but that he was staying in these really urban areas. That usually is cause for relocation. That he was not staying in the wilds of Griffith Park and coming occasionally. All of a sudden, he is hanging out near Trader Joe's in Silver Lake, and that is about as dense as you know that area. It's insanely dense. I couldn't even believe he was there.
He's like, someone's going to get hurt, if not a person, him, or both. It's going to happen. Like somebody's going to hit him with the car on a side street, or there's going to be a run-in where he feels trapped because there's people on all sides of him, and he's going to lash out. I mean, it's the potential outcome. The potential
then becomes greater for conflict. Yeah. Exactly. So when you do, and this is what happens, it's usually younger mountain lions will get themselves lost in these really urbanized neighborhoods, and that's when you will sort of move them out. And so that's, I think, if anything, what really, the capture order. But then he did injure a person, and at that point, there's no the decision. Listen, usually it doesn't matter the circumstances. Now, he did not attack this woman per se. He wasn't going after her, but she put herself, much like I think most of us with dogs would do, she put herself in the middle of him getting a dog, and she got scratched up pretty badly. Now, in any other case, usually that animal's put down. Doesn't matter the circumstances of injury. But again, CDFW really, knew, P-22 is a special case, and that that his circumstances were more our fault, not his. So that's when, okay, we need to really get him in. Now, capturing him is not easy. Jeff Sikich, who's the only one who's captured him, and Jeff, National Park Service biologist, one of the top scientists in the world for urban carnivores. He's actually known for very safe, humane captures with these big cats. He's flown all over the world to teach it. It can sometimes take a month to 2 months to capture P-22.
Wow. And we didn't have that kind of time.
But we didn't have that kind of time. And God, I'll tell you, Jeff, he's a hero of mine. He was before this. He just did not rest until he was able to get him, and he was able to get him pretty quickly. And at that point, we had the reports of him being hit by a car, and we didn't want him to die somewhere on the side of the road. So Jeff was able to get him. Actually, I think P-22 knew he needed help, because Jeff was able to P-22 saw him, I guess, turned his head, and he was able to just dart him. He didn't even
Oh,
try to
right. He didn't
flee or
run or anything.
anything. And
Yeah, yeah.
kudos to the woman's yard where he was napping in, because she was awesome.
Oh,
Yeah.
good, good. And so once he was darted and safely anesthetized, then they were able to take him in and do like a full kind of intensive veterinary, like medical check.
Yeah, when he was captured, he was definitely underweight. It looked like he had some head trauma from the vehicle strike. And they thought, well, he definitely has some mange, at least is what they thought. So nothing looked hugely serious then. But they did, because of the vehicle strike, what they did is they took him to the LA Zoo, which is very close, just for almost like the emergency room care. And then what they did after that, after he was stable, shipped him down to the San Diego Zoo Safari Park, which is one of the best medical facilities for big cats we have here. They're an awesome team. They have big cats on premises to do the more intensive testing. So again, as somebody who worked, like almost hourly with the agencies that whole week from when he was captured to when we sadly had to put him down, they were trying everything. I think, again, another unprecedented to allow a wildlife activist like me to work with us, to have us as being there and being very transparent about why they're making decisions. I can't applaud them enough. Again, I think it's so encouraging and a model that other places should follow. But they early on, they were that week looking for sanctuaries. At that point, since he had had come out, he had injured a person, it wasn't going to be possible to put him back in the wild. But a sanctuary was looking pretty good. At least at that point, right after they captured him, his injuries didn't look substantial. But then I got the call. So that was like early. They captured him over the weekend, Monday, Tuesday. I get the call on Thursday. We need you to come down to San Diego. And they sat me in a conference room, and these people were passing around tissues, and they're outlining all the results of the tests they had done. They had his organs were all herniated into his chest cavity from the vehicle strike. I mean, he couldn't even breathe fully.
Yeah.
He
Must have been
had
so scared and so much
it was
pain.
just, I mean, and they're showing all these imagery to me on the screen, and my sense of, despair was just growing, because you knew what was, me who's been around animals my whole life knew what was coming after this. He had heart disease. He had head trauma. He had stage 2 kidney failure. They were just, the list was just growing. And, some of these might have been treatable, right? The totality was not. For instance, the herniated organs, they actually, before the kidney failure was revealed, were thinking about doing surgery. Now, he might not have survived that surgery. It was pretty intensive. And again, anytime you put down a mountain lion, especially a 12-year-old one, there's risk involved. He may not survive just the anesthesia. But they were willing to, we might be able to fix this. It's risky, but it's worth it. But then the kidney
But
failure
it's still a
came.
one and done. Like, you
Right.
can't put a cat on dialysis. That's
Exactly.
like
And
a
that's what I
different,
think
yeah.
a lot of people were being critical and equating it with their pet care. Like, I've had cats and even dogs who have kidney failure. And yeah, you can get a few more months. There's no cure for it. But if you put them on fluids or whatever, right? You can't do that to a mountain lion without, again, any treatment you have to do for a wild mountain lion. You have to anesthetize them. And that is
You can't be
risky.
like, hey, P-22, come back for your appointment next week for your IV. That's not,
Yeah.
but you can do that with a dog. You can do
You
that
can
with
do
a
it with a
cat.
dog, but so even trying to prolong his life would have caused immense suffering. And then he also had this, it just would have been this awful managed care for him that was not going to be him, kind of in a sanctuary, just dying naturally. It was going to be
And the truth is,
awful.
who would that be for? It would be for us.
It would be for
It
us.
would
That's
not
what I
be for
said.
him. Yeah.
I mean, they laid out all this, and when they said, we unanimously just, we can't in good conscience allow this cat to, even if I even asked them, well, all right, all these, could you just put him somewhere and let him die? No, it would be against the suffering would be too great. We couldn't
I
allow an
see. So
animal
they
to do
knew
that.
this cat has been in pain. That's why
This
he's
cat's been
acting
in
this
pain,
way.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
but even he also had this. It was really weird. What they thought was like a mange was actually turned out to be this really rare parasitic skin condition that they've never seen in a mountain lion. Again, this gets back to his urban trappedness. It likely came from a feral cat or a domestic cat, which they do see it in. And this thing was so persistent, it's worse than mange. It's very hard to cure. It's not just one topical thing. They would have had to do baths like every week for 6 months. Again, you'd have to put them out every time, time to do that. And so imagine having poison oak you can't cure. So that was really distressing for him as well. But anyway, yeah, all these test results, and at the end, not a dry eye in this conference room. We're passing tissues around, but it was definitely, it was the right choice. He was suffering.
And so they obviously involved you and your voice and your conscientiousness in this decision-making process, but they also involved you in some of the final ritual as well, right? Like what came next after the decision was made?
Yeah, it was, obviously California Department of Fish and Wildlife. It's their decision. But yes, I am grateful that again, which I think is such a great example to be transparent about these decisions. So I think it just sets such a nice high bar for how, to collaborate and bring in new, I'm a scientist. It's not my day job, but I also am on the animal rights side of science. Right. And I think that we, recognizing that there are, animals are individuals, especially one like P-22, and require a special level of compassion or care, which interestingly enough, I've seen some critical articles about how somebody was even one of the, I think it's just those who can't let go of outdated ways of thinking about animals, but was criticizing, Chuck for crying and myself and other officials. Like,
Right.
my
But
God,
these are the same people who criticized you when you gave him a Facebook page. These are the same
exactly
people.
that.
They're
Oh my
like,
God,
don't anthropomorphize this cat.
yeah,
Yeah.
which I just
Yeah.
find the most ridiculous thing in the world. And also to criticize compassion, like, wow,
Right.
sorry. I don't know what to say to you at that point.
Right. If that's what it means to be a scientist, I don't want that
Yeah,
label. Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
just, it's really
Ugh.
insane. But nonetheless,
Mhm.
listen, it's, P-22, I think through anthropomorphizing, has connected more people to wildlife conservation and science than anything else. But,
Yeah, obviously. Yeah, and
yeah.
to what harm,
To what harm?
Really.
I mean,
He
there's
he
just,
doesn't know. Like, he
yeah,
never knew,
it's
and that's the funny thing about it. It's like a celebrity. Like, we knew so much about him, and he didn't know us at all.
right. Yeah. And I think that's a good thing. I mean, if you are still somebody and they're out there that, wildlife is here for just our uses, and they don't feel pain and they're not individuals, and how dare we think that, they are beings. Science is now showing that they have cultures and social systems and languages, and they look at the world in ways we can never even perceive. This notion that we're on top is so outdated. And I think, we need science, like I talk about. We need science to show us how, to protect them. But my God, to be someone in this age and still thinking these are not beings worthy of consideration is beyond me. And I think, um, to build relationships with wildlife is good for science as well. And I think, yeah, we have to get past this notion that the only way you can be a scientist is, if you are impersonal and think animals are, don't have any emotion towards them. I think I'm a pretty good scientist, and I'm pretty emotional about animals.
Yeah, which I personally think makes us better
Yeah.
scientists. And so you got to be there, didn't you?
Yeah, that was your question. Sorry, I got went off on a
No, no,
tangent there,
no.
but
It's no, that was,
yeah,
like, the most important tangent ever.
it was. I wasn't there when they euthanized him. I don't think I could have handled that. But the day before, after they had told me, he was euthanized on Saturday morning, and Friday when I was down there, they, after they outlined the health things, they're like, we have made some space for you to spend some time with him, and it was both.
So
Yeah, it was amazing.
was he unconscious?
No, he was wide awake.
Wow.
It was both the most profoundly moving moment of my life to sit a foot from P-22 or even just a wild mountain lion, but also the saddest moment of my life because I couldn't do anything for him. And when they initially brought him down there, the thought was they were going to put him in one of their open like paddocks, but because of that contagious skin condition, they couldn't. So they had this room, a pretty big size, like the size of a big living room that he was in. And then they had like they made him like a little, den isn't the right word. Mountain lions don't really have dens, but they had like this big kennel that they had put blankets over where he could retreat to, but he was free to move around, in this room. And so I went in there and sat next to the kennel and they opened up the blanket for me, and then they left and he hissed at me. So I was like, yay.
Good. Yeah. Yeah.
He still has it. But then I talked with him and he calmed down and he was looking at me and his face still looked like P-22 and he just such a beautiful cat, and I just like I put in the usually I told him he was a good boy and we loved him and we were so sorry and but it was the most helpless feeling I've ever had. And but it was great to see that beautiful face. To
Oh, and
say
to have
goodbye, to have that
that.
chance, I'll
Yeah.
forever be grateful for.
And also to experience something that like you knew him so intimately. You had worked like every photo ever taken of him, you knew like the back of your hand. Like you had done so much like like I don't want to call it marketing or promotion. Like what's the right word? Just so much like curation of his uh, iconography. Like you knew him, but you had never seen him in
Yeah,
his
I know.
eyes.
Isn't that it was trippy. Curation's a good word for it. Like I joke I'm like his Ari, like an entourage, and I didn't know when I went to see him, was he going to be like, oh, you're that chick who's like, put me on t-shirts. I got words for you, but he didn't seem to hold it against me. But yeah, curation, I think is a good word for it. And he did. It was, sort of like this online intimate, relationship I had, but had never actually met him. I had been with about 20 to 30 feet of him a couple times with Jeff Sikich. We'd be out tracking. I mean, I didn't see him, but he's like, yeah, he's right down there sleeping. But yeah, to know or to feel like you knew, this cat, which I felt like I knew him pretty intimately, having watched his movements, study, but yet to have never met him there until the end, it really, yeah, it was, I don't know, it was like one of those, what's that, like the Notebook type,
Yeah. Yeah.
romantic dramedies, where it's like the two meet at the end, yet it's too late, right?
Oh.
I don't know.
And I mean, I feel like this is like the hardest part, this next part that I'm going to ask you about. And maybe we don't know, and maybe there's not much you can share. I don't know. But like, what comes now, not with regard to the crossing, not with regard to your work, but like literally with regard to him? Like, was a necropsy performed? What will happen to his remains? Like, there's obviously a lot of different opinions
Yeah.
from both from the indigenous population, also from the scientific kind of population, and just a lot of different voices that need to be sort of respected. So where are things netting out?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. It's been hard to even, think about terms like remains, but I think as even with P-22, the last 10 years, how I've curated, I'm kind of also squarely in the middle of the, again, animal rightsy, or at least recognizing these animals as family members, more like the indigenous folks do, as long as respecting the need for science. And I think that I think there's room for both, is my position. I personally think he should be buried back to where he was. Yet we also need, I think, we need to enable some testing and preservation of whatever is needed, some tissue samples for science, right? I think the two extreme positions are, you can't do anything, you can't even do an autopsy on one side, to we want him to be taxidermied and preserved forever in the museum. And I think the middle ground's more appropriate. I think he, like in many issues, P-22 taught us, even those in the scientific community, to think differently. And I think the age of, mountain an animal and put them on show is over. But the age of science isn't. We really do need, to at least do some testing and preservation. Yet that should still allow for a respectful burial, which is what I want in Griffith Park. He should go home. This is a being, a family member, and I think that the least we can do is show some respect for for his next journey.
Yeah. And kind of to that end, I was hoping, I've already taken more than an hour of your time, but I was hoping that we would be able to talk at least a little bit about his upcoming
Yeah,
celebration of
I plan.
life.
Always time for you, Kara. I don't
Good,
know.
good. So yeah, tell
Yeah,
me, what is on the agenda for the community to be able to get together
yeah.
and grieve.
And I think this gets, again, at trying to honor him more as a family member. And he meant so much to so many, whether it be the indigenous community or the scientific community. Everybody loved him. I think that's what and that's why I think this conflict over his remains has been really hard for me, because he was somebody who really does bring people together, and I don't want his death to be something that divides. So I know all the folks involved. I think that they are starting good discussions. So I'm really hopeful a compromise can be met there that respects everybody. But to the end of, how do we celebrate his legacy? And he left an amazing legacy. We're going to throw him the best party LA's ever known, and we're thankful to the Greek Theater for working with us, getting a date up so quickly. And it is going to be, I think, Kara, you were at the first P-22 day and subsequent ones with Killers. So it won't be exactly like that, but it's going to be people who have had connections to P-22, who have, been so close to this work, celebrating the diversity of those connections, whether it be Warren Dixon, doing his hip hop music that P-22 inspired, indigenous tribal members talking about their connection to wildlife, those that have worked with us on the crossing and other places. Actress Julia Butters will be there to, talk about her connection, and many other special guests. Music, art, I mean, just folks who have had special connections to him, telling about their story and why they loved him. So I think, pretty similar to a human celebration of life. We'll be showing lots of cool videos about him, and also I think talking about what is next. That we're not going to let his legacy, be for nothing. I mean, my next project in his honor is going to be, we need some sort of connectivity in and out of Griffith Park. Let's do it.
Oh, I love that. And so for folks who are interested, who are like local, kind of community members, is this something that's open to the public? Is it closed? Like, how is it
Yeah,
working?
totally open to the public. That's, one of the things that's, like we talked about at the beginning, as the person who sort of curated his people's connections, or at least, his legacy for 10 years. This is part of what we're really purposeful. We want this to be open to the public. So many people loved him, and we want to be able to facilitate the grieving process. We've done some of that online, obviously, the last couple weeks, but this is a chance for people to get together. So it's absolutely open to the public. We should make sure you've signed up for our emails at savelacougars.org. We will be sending out probably next week a link to where you can get tickets online. They are free. Tickets are free, but they are limited. I think the capacity is about 5,500. So people can get tickets once we release that link. We also are probably just going to hold a number of tickets at the door for those who maybe couldn't, if we do sell out, if they couldn't get them in advance, at least you could show up the day of and see if you can get in. We do have a limited capacity, but yep, free, open to the public, family friendly, 12 to 2 at the Greek Theater, and rain or shine. And it should be we're already working on the memorial the memorial video, which should be really fun.
Oh, and I noticed when you go to savelacougars.org, there's a pop-up when you first click on the link that has the eulogy for P-22 right there when you first go. And then, of course, you can learn all about the wildlife crossing. You can learn all about P-22 Day. Like you mentioned, you can sign up for the newsletter so that you can make sure that you are kind of keeping abreast of the celebration of life and any new news. And of course, and I know that this is like whatever, but I'm going to say it, like you can go to the Save LA Cougars shop, which is where like I literally own like half of the things in the shop already. But like there's like all of the wonderful things that you've been developing with your partners over this last decade that are ways that people can kind of show their pride in LA wildlife, but also know that when they are buying these things that they're giving back to this cause.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, so that Save LA Cougars store, Karen, we'll have some memorial products that will be at the Celebration of Life, but also there. But we, once P-22 was captured, I was very purposeful. I don't like to use animals or situations like that to fundraise or to advertise. So we, again, I saw my role in our organization's role as facilitating grieving and stuff. So we didn't do any ass. Still though, oh my God, in December, we did $80,000 in sales. That was people finding us. Just to give you a comparison, we usually do about $5,000 for holiday. It's a really small store. My mother's the volunteer, my 83-year-old mother who ships out these gifts. So we usually do 100.
I saw the email that was like, sorry, we're a bit behind. Like we promised we're fulfilling them.
It's insane. I mean, she usually has to fulfill 100 orders for the holidays. She has 1,200. It's so she's doing her best. But yeah, it's a great way to support the cause.
So as I'm saying that, you're like, no, it's good. It's good. Just know that it might take a while.
But to me, that was, it was heartwarming, right? That people wanted to do something. And
it's both. They wanted to support, but they also wanted to, like, I think, show their pride. Like they wanted to wear a P-22 shirt out in public to show their fellow Angelenos or their fellow neighbors, like, that's my boo and I'm going to miss him. Like, I feel connected to this.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think that, people want to show their love for him, and it's almost like wearing a sports team jersey, right? You want to show your connection, and he was the ultimate kind of sports mascot, I guess, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it really, aside from having to figure out how we're going to get all these orders out, it really moved me that, those people had to even go the extra mile. We weren't even advertising to want to do something and show their love for P-22. So that made it really special. Plus, all that money goes right back to the cause. So that was great.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wonderful. Well, gosh, Beth, I'm wondering, I don't want to keep you too long. I'm wondering is there anything that we didn't cover, any news or anything that you feel like we should, like questions I should have asked you?
I'm trying to think. I'd say the only thing is, I think we're not, I told P-22 when I sat with him that I wouldn't stop. And I think that if anything is the mark of the significant, how significantly this cat has touched myself and so many others, that we are already, even before his death, seeing more wildlife crossings across the country and the world. Again, we just went to COP15, myself and Secretary Wade Crowfoot, and talked about California's leadership with the Wallace-Annenberg crossing. It is inspiring more. We are going to do more. I am working with, Secretary Crowfoot and Governor Newsom at looking how to do more, along with some private philanthropists to do more. So I think that if there's a hopeful part of this story, is that, P-22's death is not gonna go in vain. And he showed us so much what was possible. He changed our thinking. And I think I was looking at Griffith Park when I was down there recently, and at first I was very sad, and I was like, oh, Griffith Park's never going to be the same. But then I thought about that in a positive way. Yeah, it never will be the same, because we can't look at it the same way. We now know a mountain lion can live there, and there's no going back from that knowledge. So I think the thing to touch on is what an immense legacy this cat left for us all. And I think the gift of changing minds. I am grateful for him for changing my mind about wildlife conservation.
Oh, as am I. And this silly thought comes to my mind, that like what it means to have inspired and established such a legacy when you were a ghost cat, because all of this understanding, all of this passion and compassion came from us knowing of him, but never really seeing him.
Yeah.
Like, we would catch him on the cameras, we would catch him, but like we all knew he was there, but none of us ever encountered him. And like, that's not going to change. We now know of his passing, but like, his legacy will still be there. We will still always feel like P-22 is kind of with us. I don't think that's ever going to go away.
No, I agree. He's not someone you're always going to think of him, or most people, when you look at Griffith Park. And I think
will. Every time I hike in Griffith, you're going to think of him, because I always kind of felt his presence anyway, but I have no idea where he was at any given time. But I was like, he's out there. I don't think that's going to change.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's what's good, right? Is that he's always going to be the cat that made it in LA. And I love that. That is a game changer. And so even in his death, even in us grieving and missing him, that special connection we had to him doesn't leave us.
And I know that you know this, and I know that you've heard this, but I don't know how often you probably give yourself the time to think about this and to really look yourself in the mirror. And I know that it's not just you. There are a lot of brilliant and strong and compassionate and beautiful people. You mentioned so many names of so many people who worked tirelessly to ensure that he did have a legacy and that this movement goes on. But like, there would be no P-22 if it weren't for you, Beth. And I
appreciate that. And, as you said, it does take a village. And I'm, working with some of our partners like the National Park Service and the Conservancy and Caltrans and all the way up to, Governor Newsom and then Wallace-Annenberg and other philanthropists. Like, yes, I mean, we all played our roles. I will take credit for being stubborn and relentless and not taking no for an answer. And then also, it took somebody crazy like me to just, keep sauntering on even when we were told we were crazy. And I think, and it took somebody crazy like me to be willing to carry around a mountain lion cutout and pretend to be a mountain lion on Facebook. So it does take a village, but you need that crazy village member like me to do this.
Every year to hike his path with a tracking collar around your neck. And the thing is, like, yes, all of these people, and again, it's not to belittle, like all of these people did so much hard and tireless and incredible work. And all of these people all around the world are doing hard and incredible and tireless work for for wildlife, for ecology. But Beth, you are responsible for the magic that was P-22. And I hope you know that.
I think that's it. And what I love is I think, much like the wildlife crossings being replicated, that approach, like how, Kara, we've talked about this a lot over the years, science, again, I'm a scientist. I love science. It's not, again, not my day job, but science, you need the science. We needed the science to tell us that these cats were going extinct. We need the science to tell us how to fix it. But the science only gets you halfway. You need people to love wildlife. And that's where I think, we really, we took a very different approach. Some people still hate it and call me, a heretical, whatever. But, it's that love and it's that emotional connection to wildlife is what gets project like this built. I mean, there's so many species that have gone extinct despite all the science in the world. So it's this connecting people that I think is just so important. And I do see approaches like, one of the best examples I can show you of this is the Oklahoma Department of Wildlife. Do you follow them on Twitter? Oh my God.
No, should I? I'm going to do that right now.
Yes. It would have been heretical even a few years ago to take the approach they take. Funny.
Amazing.
They had Gar Week where they're dressing Gar up in different costumes. But you really are seeing a shift like with California and how the agencies are coupling science with, I don't know, is it compassion? I'm not even sure what the word is, but coupling
humanity.
Science
I don't know. Yeah.
And compassion and knowing that to reach people, it's not about just sharing the science. And I think that's an important step forward.
Yeah, and science is done by people and it's done for the wildlife, and we can't forget that.
Yeah,
we
you remember
that.
Yeah, you didn't. I didn't grow up wanting to protect wildlife because at age 6 I read a science book. It's because I watched Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom, right? And I think that's what gets lost a lot is that it's people's imaginations that make change. We need the science to tell us how to do that, but
they play nicely together. They're not oil and water. They work together.
They should work together. And listen, thanks for the thanks. But honestly, although it was a really hard 10 years, it really was. There's my dog. It also
he's like, Mom, come back.
it was a labor of love. It didn't I didn't really feel like I had a moral choice, to be honest. Like in some respects, it's hard to take any credit because what else would I do once I found out these mountain lions were at risk of, dying out? Like I just felt like, what was my choice? I couldn't. Here's something I could do something about. Let's, so let me do it. So
which is why it's important that we give you credit, because I know you don't always take it.
Yeah, but I appreciate
it. Oh, Beth, you're wonderful. You're so wonderful and giving with all of the hard work that you've done with your time with us here today. So, everybody, once again, go to savelacougars.org, learn what you can learn, get involved.
And we have a new website for the crossing. It's really nice. Okay. 101wildlifecrossing.org. Lots of information just on the crossing on that one too. It's
very cool. We talked about it, but of course we barely scratched the surface. So 101wildlifecrossing.org. Learn more about the Wallace-Annenberg Wildlife Crossing there. Beth, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Oh, thank you. Always a delight to talk with you, Kara.
Absolutely. And everybody listening, thank you for coming back week after week. I'm really looking forward to the next time we all get together to talk nerdy.